Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. You know, I've taken a pause for a little bit, and I thought about this. I think I'll start doing the podcast in the evenings on each weekday. I'm still trying to figure some of this stuff out. I know I'm just doing this as a hobby, and thank you for guys that are still listening to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. So what's been going on in the 2A world is kind of interesting. And what I say kind of interesting is there's not a lot of movement. There's been a case, Supreme Court case where the NRA won First Amendment rights back in a 9-0, and even the ACLU was part of dealing with this in New York. Basically, New York weaponized, the state of New York weaponized themselves and their entities against the NRA and against gun owners. And they fought back and won. It's the first time the NRA has done anything that I'm actually pretty impressed with, but it wasn't just them. What else has been going on? Well, something that's making its way through the court cases right now, it started in Massachusetts, but it's now at the Supreme Court level or pretty close to it, is there's a lawsuit from the country of Mexico against gun manufacturers in the United States. Now, what they're saying is that Mexico only has one gun store, which is the truth. Yet they're the third highest in gun violence country in gun violence in the world, and they're saying it's because the manufacturers of firearms in the United States are pushing their firearms south of the border. And what they're finding, or they're saying, is that gun manufacturers are responsible for training FFLs on how to detect straw purchases, because that's what they see is the real culprit behind getting firearms in Mexico. Now let's think about this. First off, there's one government agency that's responsible for training FFLs on how to detect a straw purchase, and that's the ATF. So yet again, the ATF is proving itself useless. But let's think about this in another level. This is a third world country, an up-and-coming third world country, one of the biggest trading partners of the United States, who has no real Second Amendment. They have one gun store, and they permit about 50 people a year to get guns, but has the third largest incidence of gun violence in the world. And they're blaming the United States, and more specifically law-abiding gun manufacturers, in their increase in crime. Now, this seems to be more of a cultural problem to me than it is anything else, and that's the country's problem, is that they're allowing violence, specifically the cartels, to come up and dictate policy, what's happening in Mexico. And the reason why they are so toothless is there is an unarmed populace. Had the populace been armed, they would have been able to defend themselves against cartel violence, especially at the scale it's happening. You know, it's happening pretty often in Mexico in the streets. And if people were armed to defend themselves, they would be less subjugated to violence perpetrated by people that were armed and they're not armed. Okay, that's one. The other part of this is that we have something called the PLCAA. Now, what this is, it's a law that allows firearms dealers or firearms manufacturers to sell their firearms legally here without legal repercussions such as this, because what that would do is prohibit them from being able to manufacture firearms or prohibit them from legal commerce. And that's what this law is based around. But this seems suspiciously like the Biden administration or the current administration, I'm not really caring if it's a Biden administration or not, is pushing this down to try to get at our 2A rights here. Now, why does this have possibility of being a bad thing for Americans? Well, a couple of ways. United States is one of the biggest purveyors of international law, meaning that we help spread international law and trade disputes. And this is where the United States is one of the biggest enforcers of this. this type of action throughout the world. China is not one of those ones that listens to international law, at least neither is Russia. A lot of times India isn't either. But the rest of the NATO countries and most of the G7 and G8 countries that trade are economic powerhouses in the world do. And this has the potential to spill over there, which would have trade repercussions with us, and that would be a bad thing, that you could see the either administration getting into power to try to keep a hold of the economic situations at the world level, to try and curtail gun rights here in the United States, because they would be trying to stick to some law that was, or some agreement that was made because of the international law stuff that's going on here. Now, what do I think of the likelihood of that being successful? I think it's pretty nil, but it's still something, a concern we need to be abreast of. There's election season, so this is the election that's supposed to determine the world again. I don't believe it will, because I've lived through several of those already. I don't particularly like either candidate, more so because this 2A fight that we've been in for years now has been because of the last president we had, and him opening the door to the ATF and using executive actions to skirt law. So what do I think about this, though, between the two candidates that are obvious right now? There's a third. There's the Libertarian Party candidate, which is a communist, an outright dyed-in-the-wool communist. That's the first time I ever thought that the Libertarian Party went completely the wrong direction they should have. They had the potential with the Mises Caucus to bring in someone who's more like Ron Paul. Instead, they picked someone who backed vaccine mandates, especially for government, not for government, but for private entities. And why that doesn't seem like a big deal, that's pretty much what pushed the vaccine mandates into lawfare that we've had to all deal with. Okay, so that's kind of counter to what the Libertarian Party is supposed to do. The Libertarian Party during the last presidential election had a clown then, too. That was their presidential candidate, and I couldn't back her. JFK Jr., Robert Kennedy Jr., there's no way I could back him, because he said he would actually sign a bill that would remove 2A rights if it was ever passed by House and Senate. Now, the odds of that happening are pretty slim, but the fact that he said he would do it is enough to where I wouldn't do that. What I would actually question a lot of people right now, because of the COVID stuff that happened, we saw a lot of this lawfare where the judicial system has been weaponized. And it's been weaponized against 2A folks for a long time. How are you going to deal with this? Because to me, seeing the weaponization of the legal system has been happening for a long time. There's been a lot of gun owners that are in jail right now. There's one in New York that, he did nothing wrong, but he's looking at 10 to 20 years in prison right now. He's currently in jail. The guy that made the little card that had the template on it that could be turned into an auto sear, he's in jail. This is the weaponization of the legal system. And it's something that we've all in the 2A have been watching very carefully, but there's a lot of people on the right specifically that are law and order types that if there is a crime committed and you are convicted, they absolutely think you should, languish in those consequences forever. So much so that they look at restoring felons' rights for nonviolent offenders as a bad thing. And I ask you now, is that really the case? You had your primary candidate for president who's now a convicted felon. He cannot legally own a firearm. Is that the same, what happens with those cases where these people were convicted of nonviolent offenses? They sold drugs, but then they got straight and they've been under the radar. They have not offended again for 10 plus years. What about someone who did had a mistake in their thought logic and embezzled money? And, this is a complete nonviolent offender. And now because of the amount of money involved it's a felony. So these guys have never done anything that was violent, like a lot of offenders in the United States that get turned out back on the street. And their rights are stripped away from them. They're not allowed to vote. They're not allowed to have their 2A rights. And this is where I'm not even going to claim libertarian anymore because of the situation with the presidential candidate that they put forth. I'm an ANCAP. I'm becoming more and more of an anarchist. And the reason why that is because of what you're seeing with the legal system and how too large of a government works, and it works against the people. I'm going to say something that's kind of controversial, and that is that if you have a moral compass or you have a moral society, the lawfare necessary to keep that in line is negligible, in that they're going to keep themselves in line. So where this relates to the United States is we're a Judeo-Christian background. Now, a lot of people will say you don't have to be Christian to have those morals, and they're absolutely correct. But you were raised in a Judeo-Christian-backed society. Western society is based on Judeo-Christianity, and whether you believe or not, it's those values that are instilled throughout Western civilization that have kept you alive and kept you happy, semi-happy, and at least going on further. And it's kept crime in check because there is a moral caricature here, or a character here, that has been developed over years, hundreds of years in the United States experiment case, that keeps everybody safe and keeps everything going. We've seen after COVID, during the Summer of Love, we've seen the breakdown of that moral compass. So much so that we're seeing these idiots going and reading to kids that probably shouldn't be exposed to kids. We're seeing basic degeneracy in our culture here, not necessarily in the 2A culture, but in the American culture. And it's because of a breakdown of that moral compass. It's fine what you do in your own home. I'm still a firm believer of that. Everyone has free choice. It's the greatest gift that we've ever been given. So you're free to make your own decisions and make your own mistakes. You should not punish society for that, though. We're in Pride Month, which is kind of hilarious. Why I say it's hilarious is because it seems to be motivated by financial gain more so than anything else. Not about inclusion, or not about talking to people that have been ostracized and outcast in the world. It's developed into this really, really kind of greedy corporatism type thing. I mean, you see Fortune 500 companies instantly throw up the rainbow. And, the rainbow they're throwing up is technically a little perverted anyway. It's showing a color pretty much that isn't part of the original rainbow, which is God's promise that he wouldn't destroy the world again, which shows there's some more perversion there. But if you look at how the pride flag has evolved in the last couple of years, now there's the gay trans stuff, there's the map people that they're all represented in this flag now. It's become this multicolor, multi-shaped object that's supposed to represent something, but in reality it really represents oppression more than it does anything else. And here's why I say that. Anyone who speaks out and uses their First Amendment right now against that flag or against the old school pride flag is ostracized and cast out of society, because we're supposed to be better individuals now. Let's think about that. American values are that you have the right to speak your mind, whether we agree with you or not. My own personal views on this are, you do you. You're going to have to face consequences at some point in your life because of the decisions you made. and that's completely up to you. You're loved either way, because that is what we're supposed to do, love people as they are, warts and all. That's one of the things I've noticed about the 2A, is that there is a lot of love in the 2A for our cadre of people. And no one really cares about your sexuality in the 2A community, and it doesn't matter, because, again, it goes to what you do in your own home. It's depressing, though, to see that the weaponization has gotten so bad that a front-running candidate for presidency is now a convicted felon. That there should be some soul-searching here for a lot of people. Not necessarily me. Between the candidates I've listed, Trump is the least of the least evil. That being said, I don't know that I could vote for the man again. I am at that point where the national elections don't matter to me anymore. The local ones do. Because I have access to the local people, and I've looked at what they bring to the table, and I've looked at it multiple times. I've gone to Santa Fe here in New Mexico, and I have seen the people that are the vocal advocates of the 2A here. And there are, without a doubt, people that are in position that are running right now that probably should be reelected, because they are continually going to bat for the 2A. There's also a lot of people that are kind of wolves in sheep's clothing in the Republican Party. They like to call them rhinos. But I would say that on both sides of the aisle nowadays, there's a lot of people that instantly come out and say, yeah, we're pro-2A, or yeah, we don't believe you should be exposing kids to this type of content in schools. And then the minute they get in there, they vote in lockstep with these policies. Our governor is the most fascist governor I've ever heard of. She has literally taken the 2A and cast it aside in an entire county in New Mexico, the largest, most populated county in New Mexico. And there's still not a lot of legal repercussions for her. And she postponed the special session that she called for, where she was going to call for more gun laws, because of the primary that's going on right now. So the primary early voting ended Sunday. The primary tomorrow is to see who's going to be on the ballot for the November elections. Now, a lot of people will say, after the last presidential election, how can you say that voting matters? Well, I've worked in the election system in New Mexico multiple years, for a long time, for multiple presidential elections and multiple primaries, multiple general elections. And I can tell you, without a doubt, it matters. Fixing an election in New Mexico is not as simple as what people think. You can't just fool the machine. And why I say that is because there's safety checks on every ballot that's ever issued in New Mexico. There's safety checks on how they're counted. And the machine here really is just a tabulator. The programming that goes in it is to see where the bubbles are to read them and to give you the results at the end. Those are supposed to be verified by the paper ballots that are in the box that you voted on. Okay? And if there ever was a large enough question of the election here, and there's been that in New Mexico, I'm not saying the system's perfect, I'm saying that there's safety checks for that. That paper is supposed to be counted. That paper ballot is, and that's supposed to be verified by your precinct judges and by your county clerks. And what's even harder for all this is there are hundreds in San Juan County, for instance. I want to say there's 93 or 100, 120, something like that, precincts in San Juan County, because we have a large county here. To rig an election, you'd have to have the presiding judge, which is supposed to be the opposite of the leading party in New Mexico, the precinct judge themselves, who verify the tallies at each precinct. Then you'd have to say that everyone that was working that precinct helped get in on this, because there's verifiers of each count each time they do this from opposite parties because they don't want one party to be overly represented when they give the results. The results that I've seen in San Juan County, at least, are generally exactly what you would expect from a very heavily Republican county. If you're closer bordering towards the reservation, it seems that you're going to vote Democrat, and that's reflected in the ballots that are counted there. Everywhere else in San Juan County, it's usually pretty heavily reflected Republican, and that's why Republican representation of Northwest New Mexico is usually what happens for our neck of the woods. Now, what does that mean? It means that it all matters. There's all, a drop is in, everybody puts a drop in the bucket, basically. And I no longer see that the national level that we can fix the problems we have because there's 4 years, maybe 8 years of one cabinet, one position, one cadre of people that can affect change, and they don't really have those changes at the local level. They have to do it at the national level. So any of those national level dudes, ladies or dudes, that are saying that they're going to fix it, fix your streets, that's not going to happen because they're looking at national issues, not local issues. So for too long, we've been focused on the national election, and we've looked at the lawfare of that's going on and neglected our local ones. And if we want to make change in our state, we have to look at the local ones so we can get rid of those people that are, keeping us behind the blue wall for the 90-plus years in New Mexico. And it reflects our economy, our crime rates, our educational level in New Mexico, all reflects poor policy, and that doesn't get fixed overnight, even if we were to swap in 100% to Republican from top to bottom or Libertarian from top to bottom. It can't be fixed that quickly. You can't turn a ship that's already in motion that rapidly, but you can change its direction or you can slow its direction, and it'll take time to get it to where it needs to be. And that's what needs to happen in New Mexico. That's what needs to happen at the local city elections. It's what needs to happen for the school board elections. All of this matters when it goes to 2A rights because they're all reflective of this. If you're taught to hate American civil rights because you voicing your opinion makes you a Nazi, which itself is counterintuitive, then how does that reflect on the 2A? If you're so okay with kids seeing pornographic images in books, how is that going to be reflective of the American moral compass? When you start breaking kids at a young age, it takes years for that to be fixed. I know that from firsthand. I didn't grow up with the most loving mother. Let's just say she was outright abusive. At the end of her life, towards the end of her life, we made peace, though. And I mean that wholeheartedly. We had a lot of heart-to-heart talks. We got through a lot of the old past stuff. But I'm still dealing with the baggage that was handed to me when I was a kid. And so we're allowing that to happen in our schools. We're allowing that to happen in our culture. And without someone standing up and saying no, it's not going to fix itself. And this is where the 2A guys got to be what we do normally. We got to pick up on those other issues and say, hey, enough's enough. You may not care if someone bows their head and prays, but it shouldn't be offensive. You also shouldn't care if they're flying whatever flag. That's not offensive. But having someone half naked walking down the middle of Main Street America and you having to explain to your toddler or your kid or your grandkids what the hell that is, that's not American. You're not allowed to surf porn in schools. I know that for a fact because I used to regulate that. You couldn't do it. I blocked it. That's because we don't want little kids to be messed up. We want to keep them as innocent as we can. So why are we exposing to that type of content everywhere. Not just, in schools, in books, and video games, everywhere. Where's the moral compass? And where's your line in the sand? I've talked about this a number of times when it comes to the 2A. But as you've seen with the newest conviction of the leading candidate for presidency in the United States, who's now a convicted felon, where do you sit? All those of you that say the law and order dudes that I've talked about, where do you sit? I know where a lot of my libertarian friends, a lot of my, the few listeners I have, actually sit. We're of the volition that you should get your rights back once you paid your debt to society. And if you've done that without having a means to get back and be 100% citizen, you are always something lesser, and that shouldn't be the case. So I leave you with these questions to ponder. We're still, I say we, Lance and myself are still negotiating when we're going to get to get the stuff for reloading. The other cool stuff, check out Robsky's videos. He's trying to find the king of the AKs. In my humble opinion, the Mighty Wasser wins again. He would say different. The NPAP one for the AK open sight challenge, he's shooting out to 508 yards with a open-sighted AK. So far, he's had the Chinese Polytech milled AK. He's had the NPAP and he's had the Mighty Wasser. And the NPAP did 8 out of 10. The Wasser did 7 out of 10. But the Polytech, I didn't even get to watch that video because it's Chinesium, it's unobtainium. You're not going to have one, or you're not going to find one nowadays unless you're going to pay $2,000 for. But the Wasser did it with over 20,000 rounds down the barrel, and it was able to get 7 rounds on target, which shows that it's durable as heck. And for those of you looking for entry-level AKs, they're right around $900, and I've had 2 of them now, and I can tell you the Mighty Wasser is a little sewing machine. It just runs. The other thing, check out Brandon Herrera's video where he has the Sturmgewehr, the STG-44. It's pretty entertaining. There are some fun parts, and that's what we need to focus on, is building our culture, and that's what those guys are doing. It gets depressing to talk about these same things all the time, and this is a political and gun podcast. And I was debating how I was going to bring this out and talk about what's just happened, because I know several of my friends in real life that would not vote for a convicted felon. But here you are. What are you going to do? Shouldn't that same grace be extended to the other felons now? If you're willing to think about that, what about those nonviolent offenders? Shouldn't they be allowed to be American citizens again? Like, share, subscribe. Most importantly, be great.